The bright California sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of a Walmart in San Diego as families bustled in and out of the store, loading their cars with groceries and essentials. Among them was 6-year-old Emily, a cheerful little girl with curly blonde hair and an infectious smile. She clutched her mother's hand as they approached the entrance, her eyes scanning the crowd with curiosity. Standing near the entrance was an older man in a neatly pressed Marine Corps cap, his weathered face bearing the marks of years of service. His name was James Walker, a retired veteran who had spent 3 decades in the military before settling into a quieter life in California. Though retired, his instincts remained sharp. Once a soldier, always a soldier. Emily noticed him immediately. Her father, who had served in the Navy, had taught her to always show respect to veterans. With a wide grin, she let go of her mother's hand for just a moment and waved enthusiastically at the old man. "Hi, mister," she chirped. James, caught off guard, turned and saw the little girl waving at him. His stern expression softened as he lifted a hand and returned the wave. It was a simple, innocent moment, one that reminded him of the kindness that still existed in the world. He smiled warmly at Emily, about to say something, when his sharp eyes caught movement in the distance. A man in a dark hoodie was loitering near the store's entrance, his body language suspicious. James noticed him scanning the crowd, his hands buried deep in his pockets. Something about his stance sent a ripple of unease through James. He had seen this kind of behavior before: shifty glances, tense posture, erratic movements. His gut told him something wasn't right. Then he saw it, a glint of metal as the man subtly adjusted his pocket. A gun! James' body went rigid. His training kicked in before his conscious mind could process the full weight of the situation. Without hesitation, he moved toward Emily and her mother, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, take your daughter and get inside the store. Now." Emily's mother, startled by the sudden urgency in his voice, hesitated for only a second before recognizing the seriousness in his gaze. She grabbed Emily's hand tightly and hurried through the automatic doors. James turned his attention back to the man in the hoodie, who had begun to move. The veteran assessed his options. He was unarmed, but he wasn't defenseless. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted his stance, preparing to intervene if necessary. He scanned the parking lot, looking for backup. As if on cue, a police officer on patrol was walking toward the store from a parked cruiser. Wasting no time, James called out in a voice sharpened by years of command. "Officer!" Armed suspect at the entrance, right side. The officer's head snapped up, immediately reaching for his radio, while his other hand went to his holster. The man in the hoodie heard the alert and panicked. He turned sharply, tried to retreat, but James was already moving. With years of training still ingrained in his reflexes, he stepped into the man's path, his stance solid. "Drop it," James commanded. His voice was calm but unwavering. The suspect hesitated, his eyes darting between James and the officer now closing in. The moment stretched taut, the tension thick enough to suffocate. Then, seeing no escape, the man tossed the gun onto the ground and raised his hands just as the officer reached them, drawing his weapon and ordering the man to the ground. Within moments, the suspect was in handcuffs, the danger neutralized. James exhaled, his muscles finally relaxing. The bystanders who had witnessed the incident murmured in hushed voices, some pulling out their phones, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Emily and her mother peeked from inside the store, watching as the police officer gave James a nod of appreciation. "You've got sharp eyes," the officer said. James gave a small, knowing smile. You never really stop looking. As the crowd dispersed and the officer led the suspect away, James turned back to see Emily still standing by the doors, watching him with wide eyes. She waved again, this time slower, more thoughtful. James returned the wave, giving her a reassuring nod, a simple gesture, yet one that had led to something far greater. And as the California sun continued to shine down on the busy Walmart parking lot, James Walker walked away, knowing he had done what he had always done: serve and protect. Emily's mother knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Emily nodded, still staring at the older man who had just stopped something terrible from happening. He's like a hero, she whispered. Her mother smiled, squeezing her little hand. Yes, he is. Meanwhile, James took a deep breath, his heart still racing from the adrenaline. Even after all these years, his body reacted as if he were still in combat. He had spent decades in the military, serving in the Middle East, leading missions, making decisions in split seconds that meant life or death. Those instincts never truly faded. He looked down at his hands, steady as ever, but inside, he felt the familiar weight of responsibility, the same feeling he had every time he protected someone. The police officer approached again after securing the suspect in the squad car. "Sir, I'd like to take your statement," he said, pulling out a small notepad. James nodded, recounting everything he had seen. The officer scribbled furiously, occasionally glancing up at the veteran with admiration. When James finished, the officer extended his hand. "You saved a lot of people today," he said sincerely. "Thank you for your service, both then and now." James shook his hand firmly, just doing what needed to be done. As he turned to leave, he heard small footsteps running toward him. Emily had slipped away from her mother and hurried over, her eyes filled with a mix of awe and gratitude. "Wait," she called, stopping in front of him. She hesitated for a second, then threw her tiny arms around his waist. "Thank you for saving us." James felt his breath hitch. It wasn't the first time someone had thanked him for his service, but something about this little girl's innocent gratitude struck him deeply. He slowly knelt down to her level, his old knees aching as he did. "You're very brave," he told her gently. "Always trust your instincts, and always look out for others, okay?" Emily nodded vigorously. "Like you?" James chuckled. "Like you?" Her mother reached them and gave James a warm smile. "We really appreciate what you did," she said. "If you hadn't noticed him when you did..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Thank you." James simply nodded, offering one last small smile to Emily before standing. "Take care of each other." With that, he turned and walked toward his car, the California sun casting his long shadow across the pavement. As he drove home, he found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. Life had been quiet since he retired, and sometimes he wondered if his best days were behind him. But today proved something he had almost forgotten. He still had a purpose. And as he glanced in his rear-view mirror, seeing the Walmart fading into the distance, he realized something else. Sometimes, the smallest gestures, a simple wave, a moment of kindness, could lead to something much bigger. And that, he thought with a contented sigh, was what made life worth living. That evening, as James Walker sat on his small porch in a San Diego neighborhood, the events of the day replayed in his mind. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, and a cool breeze rustled the palm trees. He sipped his black coffee, his fingers wrapped around the warm mug, grounding him in the present. It wasn't the first time he had reacted in a moment of crisis. His years in the military had shaped him into a man who could assess danger within seconds. But today had felt different. It wasn't on a battlefield, nor was he surrounded by fellow soldiers. It was an ordinary day in an ordinary place, yet his instincts had saved lives. His phone buzzed on the small wooden table beside him. He glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mr. Walker?" A warm voice said on the other end, "This is Lisa Carter. We met at Walmart today. I'm Emily's mother." James straightened slightly in his chair. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine," Lisa assured him. I wanted to call and say thank you again. After we got home, Emily wouldn't stop talking about you. She kept calling you a real-life hero." James chuckled softly. "She's a sweet kid." "She is," Lisa agreed. "And she wanted to ask something, but she was too shy. She wanted to know if she could send you a card." James was quiet for a moment. It had been a long time since anyone had offered him something as simple yet meaningful as a thank you card. He had spent years being saluted, being recognized for his service, but this felt different. "I'd like that," he finally said. Lisa sounded relieved. "That's wonderful. If you're comfortable, maybe we could meet for lunch this weekend?" Emily would love to see you again. James hesitated. He had spent so much time keeping to himself, not getting close to people outside of his old military friends. But something about today, about that little girl's innocent gratitude, made him realize he didn't have to live in the past. "I'd like that too," he said. They exchanged details, and after hanging up, James leaned back in his chair, watching the last light of the sun dip below the horizon. He had spent so many years wondering if his life after service would ever feel as fulfilling as his years in the military. Today, he had his answer. Because even in the simplest of moments, a wave from a child, a thank you from a stranger, he had found something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. And for the first time in years, James Walker allowed himself to truly smile. The following Saturday, James found himself parked outside a small cafe near the San Diego marina. The salty ocean breeze carried the distant sound of seagulls, and the late morning sun cast a warm glow over the patio seating. He had arrived 10 minutes early, an old habit from his military days, but he didn't mind. It gave him time to gather his thoughts. He had spent the past few years keeping to himself, living a quiet life after retirement. He wasn't antisocial, but he also wasn't the kind of man who sought out company. Yet here he was, about to have lunch with a little girl and her mother because of a single moment in a Walmart parking lot. A tap on his window startled him from his thoughts. Turning, he saw Emily's bright face beaming up at him, her small hand waving just as she had that day. "You came," she said excitedly as he stepped out of his truck. "Of course," James replied with a chuckle. Didn't want to miss out on a good meal. Lisa walked up behind Emily, smiling warmly. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Walker." "Just James," he corrected. "All right, James," she said. "Thanks for meeting us." They found a quiet table outside, and Emily eagerly handed James a small, handmade card. It was decorated with crayon drawings of an American flag and a stick figure in a Marine Corps hat. Inside, in shaky but determined handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for being my hero. Love, Emily." James stared at the card for a long moment, his throat tightening unexpectedly. He had received medals, plaques, and commendations throughout his military career, but this simple note meant more than he could express. "Thank you, kiddo," he said softly, carefully tucking the card into the pocket of his jacket. They ordered their meals, and as they ate, Emily bombarded James with questions. "Were you really in the Marines?" "Yes, ma'am." "Did you fight bad guys?" "Well," James said thoughtfully, "I did my best to keep people safe, just like police do here." "Did you ever get scared?" James hesitated before answering honestly. "Sometimes. But being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are." Emily seemed to think about that for a moment before nodding seriously, as if filing it away as an important life lesson. Lisa smiled, watching the exchange. "Emily's been talking about joining the military when she grows up," she said. "She wants to be just like her dad was." James glanced at Lisa, catching the past tense in her words. He understood instantly. Lisa noticed his expression and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. "He passed away 2 years ago," she said gently. "Navy veteran." Emily was very close to him. James looked at Emily, who was now sipping her lemonade, swinging her legs under the table. He suddenly understood why she had been so quick to wave at him that day. She had recognized something familiar in him. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. Lisa nodded. "Thank you. It's been tough, but we take it one day at a time." The rest of lunch was lighthearted, filled with Emily's endless questions and James' patient answers. For the first time in a long while, James felt a genuine sense of connection, not just to Emily, but to the idea that his presence could still make a difference. As they prepared to leave, Emily suddenly reached for James' hand. "Can we see you again?" she asked hopefully. James looked down at her small fingers curled around his calloused hand. He had spent years wondering if his purpose had ended when he took off his uniform. But looking into the hopeful eyes of the little girl who had lost her hero, he realized something. Maybe he still had a reason to serve. "I'd like that," he said. And with that, James Walker found himself walking towards something he never expected: family, in the most unexpected of places. Over the next few weeks, James found himself spending more time with Emily and Lisa than he ever expected. What started as a single lunch turned into weekend meetups at the park, small trips to the local ice cream shop, and even an afternoon at the beach. Emily had quickly latched onto him, seeing him as not just a hero, but as someone she could talk to about things she once only shared with her father. James, in turn, found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He had spent so long keeping his distance from people, convinced that his purpose had been served, that his best years were behind him. But every time Emily laughed at one of his stories or looked up at him with admiration, he felt something shift inside him, a sense of belonging. One afternoon, as he sat on a wooden bench at a park near the marina, watching Emily run around with a kite, Lisa sat beside him with a cup of coffee in her hands. "She's taken quite a liking to you," Lisa said, smiling as she watched Emily chase after the kite string. James nodded, a small smirk playing on his lips. "She's a great kid. Smart, too." Lisa sipped her coffee before glancing at him. She hasn't been this happy in a long time. Losing her dad was hard. It still is. James remained quiet, allowing her the space to continue. She used to sit in her room for hours, reading his old letters, looking at his medals. She always felt connected to him that way, Lisa explained. But when she met you, I think she saw a little bit of him in you. Someone strong, someone who understands. James felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected to become this important to someone, especially a little girl who had already lost so much. He had spent years trying to forget his own losses, pushing away the past so it wouldn't haunt him. But now, he wasn't just looking at his own life. He was looking at the impact he could have on someone else's. "I don't want to overstep," he finally said. "But if she ever needs someone to talk to, I'm here." Lisa reached over, placing a hand on his arm. "You already are." For the first time in years, James Walker felt something he hadn't in a long time. Home. A few months later, as summer began to fade into fall, James received a call from Lisa. "Hey," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. "Emily has something she wants to ask you." Curious, James agreed to meet them at their favorite cafe. When he arrived, Emily was practically bouncing in her seat, a nervous yet excited grin on her face. "What's going on, kiddo?" James asked as he sat down. Emily took a deep breath, fidgeting with her hands before finally blurting out, "Would you come to my school's Veterans Day assembly?" James blinked. "Your assembly?" Emily nodded quickly. "Yeah, we're supposed to bring someone special who served in the military. And she hesitated, suddenly shy. "I want to bring you." James felt something deep in his chest tighten. Of all the honors he had received in his life, none had ever meant as much as a little girl simply wanting him to stand beside her. He cleared his throat, trying to push past the unexpected wave of emotion. "I'd be honored," he said. Emily's face lit up, and she launched herself into his arms in a tight hug. "Thank you, Mr. James." As he hugged her back, James realized that somewhere along the way, between the ice cream trips and shared stories, between the kite-flying afternoons and quiet conversations, something had changed. He wasn't just a veteran anymore. He was family,